Yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome to, I think it's the 8th presentation now in our seminar series, The Power of Humour. This week, it gives me really great pleasure to introduce Lydia Amir to you. She's a fellow lover of philosophy, teaches at the Tufts University, teaches philosophy there, Boston, USA. And she's also one of the central, I'd say, movers and shakers in humour research. She's the editor of an international journal on humour research, and she founded the Philosophy of Humor Yearbook. And she has herself published numerous texts on philosophy and humour, including all these books, exciting books on humour and the good life, philosophy, humour and the human condition, taking ridicule seriously, legacy of Nietzsche's philosophy of laughter, which is fabulous. And today she'll be talking to us on philosophic humour as a conceptual tool that offers a new model of rationality, which kind of exceeds reason in its ability to comprehend contradictions. So some of you will know that in our last year's seminar, we kind of grappled with the idea of complexity thinking. And so often when I was chatting to my co-host after the series and all of that, we agreed time and again that you definitely need a sense of humor for this complexity stuff. So I'm very much looking forward to unpacking the links between complexity thinking and humor. And we are very excited and honored to welcome Lydia to the seminar. And we very much, well, I certainly am very much looking forward to this presentation. So thank you, and over to you, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for this wonderful presentation. Can you hear me well? Is everything all right?
Yes, yes, we can.
So, you know, the Eurovision contest is on. So in the spirit of the Eurovision contest, which I've seen yesterday, let me say hello, South Africa. And hello, the people who are here from the rest of the world. I'm very, very happy and grateful to have been invited to participate. And I think this is a wonderful series. I would like to mention that I have founded, you know, the International Association for the Philosophy of Humor a few years ago. And now we have 200 members. So in order to join the association, membership is free. Just write to me, to my regular email with your affiliation or position and name and email and fields of interest. And I will gladly join you to the list. We are present in all the American Philosophical Association conferences. We have one international conference every year. This year it's going to be in Bologna, in Italy at the end of June, next year in the United States. So I would like you to know all of that. I would like also to begin by mentioning something that I think is of interest. I think some of you are teaching at the Nelson Mandela University. And I don't know if you all know that Martin Nussbaum, the great scholar that began with tragedy and in ancient thought, actually developed an interest in humor. And in her book, Anger and Forgiveness, she has a third of the book, I think, dedicated to Mandela's sense of humor and the capacity of his humor to overcome whatever were the dire circumstances of most of his life. And she developed this interest due to her interest in Stoicism. She also translated a satire by Seneca. And I'm telling you all that because beginning as a scholar of tragedy and developing into a scholar of humor, that means that there's hope for all of us. And those who think that humor cannot be developed, cannot be acquired as a skill, well, may be mistaken. So I'm saying that in advance, in the case of someone who will hear what I would be saying next, will say, yes, but I don't have a sense of humor, or not everybody has a sense of humor. This is a skill that can and should be developed. I have also developed a system for developing it, and I probed it on younger children, on gifted children, on adults for many years. So I know it works. And it works especially if we want to become not a comedian, not a buffoon, not a joke teller, but we want to use humor in order to cope better with our life. And as philosophers, the most important thing is to think better. So this will be the focus of my talk. What interest can we find as philosophers in humor? How humor can help us think better and not just have a respite or rest for the seriousness of life. And as Aristotle said, that you're supposed to relax and to have some time off of that seriousness. So humor is not only that, it's something that if it's skillfully used in a way that doesn't need a very, very well-developed sense of humor, but just the idea of accepting to use it internally, which is very difficult and different than using it to laugh on other people. So how this tool, if we use it internally, can actually help us make the most of philosophy, can help us implement her ideas, and also, as I would offer, maybe through a new model of rationality that humor would enable, would help us also maybe to reach some ideas that we never thought possible, and that I offer in that book on the human condition. So let me begin with a word of introduction about the mystery of humor. You know that during the entire history of the West, and I invite you to look at African history, is it the same or not? Because I've looked into Chinese philosophy and Indian philosophy for that, but now I'm talking about the West. There was a view of Homo ridens. This is in Latin. Homo means man, and ridden is the laughing man. And this was a view that associated laughter or humor. They were not very clear on the terms. If you want laughter as an umbrella concept, associated it with the human being. So how this idea came about? It came about through a wrong interpretation, a wrong reading of Aristotle formulation. Aristotle, in a book that talks about the capacity of the human being to laugh out of tickling, or being tickled, said that the human being is the sole animal that laughs. But in the Middle Ages, and we can trace this interpretation, this was understood as saying that human beings are the sole who have a sense of humor. And then, because it was supposed that Aristotle said that human beings are the sole to be rational, so a link, an association between rationality and sense of humor was sought. And so this is very interesting, because this is how that tradition, what I would call a tradition in philosophy and in culture, associated laughter, especially with the human being. But why would this be so? This was unclear and is unclear to this day. Today, we know at least that laughter is not specifically human. We know, because we paid attention to that rats laugh or emit some kind of noise similar to laughter when we tickle them. But not only the tickling that Aristotle thought were specifically human, not only the laughter of tickling is human, but is not solely human, but also maybe some forms of laughter that we can find in apes, that some kind of play that we find in many higher or not necessarily higher animals. Maybe humor is a form of play. And also, most interestingly, some people who have dogs can swear that they really smile. So this is another topic to show that Aristotle was wrong in his finding at the time that the human being is the sole animal that laughs. But it was interpreted in a way that makes of humor, if you want, more than the capacity the physical capacity of laughter that we know can be induced by gas, by being induced by what was called hysteria, that can come from many forms that have nothing to do with humor. So let's say now that humor as an umbrella term was thought to be connected somehow with the human being and maybe through his rationality. The one that actually dismantled this thesis was Schopenhauer in the 19th century. He actually said that we laugh because we are happy when we see rationality defeated. So there is something else in us that laughs, the irrational part that is actually happy to see that reason, the part of us that actually tries to govern our world and life, that part being defeated when there is a discrepancy between the concept and the perception, between the way we think and the way we experience life. So in a way, the relationship between philosophy as an abstract concatenation of concepts and everyday life will be a laughable one or humorous one, an incongruous one at least. So that tradition of homo ridens that also Schopenhauer partakes in, he just thinks that the reason the human being is the one that laughs is because of the discrepancy between reason and reality, but still, as you see, it's connected to reason. That tradition in philosophy made us wonder for years, and to this day, what is the actual relationship between the human being and humor, as I said, as an umbrella term. So you know that there is an association for the study of humor, not necessarily the philosophy of humor. And I've been part of it since I was in my early 20s. And to this day, although scholars from every possible discipline joined there, to this day, humor remains a mystery. So I think this is a good reason for the freshness and the interest in a series like that we are not dealing with the dead concept that is already understood, or maybe with dead controversies about way to define it. We are dealing with a lively, interesting, timely problem, which is still maybe not, as I tried to say when I created the association, not necessarily the nature of humor, of laughter, which is not the most interesting question for various reasons. I cannot go in there here. Not necessarily its nature, but its roles. What can humor or laughter do in what I call the good life, in the way we want to live our life, in the good lives that philosophers have offered to this day? Did philosophers offer arguments that sustain the use of humor or laughter? It depends on the term they use. Did they offer arguments that explain that it's important to use humor? And if yes, what was the role of humor? Was it only an ethical thing, a political thing? Was it an epistemological tool, as I try to show most of the time? Maybe also an ontological tool, a tool that would reveal the ground of being. So I was interested in that, and this is why I created this series of books that answer the question, what is the role of humor in the good life? Now I'm finishing the one of laughter in the good life. The first was about Shaftesbury, Hamann, and Kierkegaard. The second now that I'm finishing is Montaigne, Nietzsche, and Santayana, with an paintings on Bergson. And the third one that got published first because Routledge insisted on the deadline. So it's Nietzsche's Legacy of Laughter in France through the original philosophies of Georges Bataille, Gilles Deleuze, and Clément Rosset, who recently died. So what's the role of humor in the good life? So I have a proposal of my own. You know, you can read the historical parts, and of course we can learn from them a lot. And the reason I wrote the one on the French philosophers is to put my French, as you hear my accent, I am from Paris originally, to put my French at the service of people who do not know French in order to explain those philosophers better, because they show us some dark sides of humor that we don't know of or do not want to acknowledge, especially not Americans. And all these books also have the connection between the tragic and the comic, which is also important and which make for the complexity, as Andrea said, of our lives and of our way of approaching reality. So are we necessarily approaching it with a tragic view of life? If yes, it's important to say that. Not everybody is allowed to express a tragic sense of life. Unfortunately, it's important to defend it. Then maybe some philosophers associate the tragic with the comic. We know that a lot of comedies are actually based on tragic themes, and there is a relationship between the genre. What about life? And so it's interesting to see the tragic and the comic and the relationship and humor or laughter in the role of the good life of many philosophers. In my case, I dealt till now with modern philosophers. I have another book forthcoming that explains it from the beginning of philosophy in the West, unfortunately, to the 21st century through 10 traditions that associate philosophy with humor or laughter. All right, so if we have such an interesting background, historically speaking, that I had no idea of, that I was sure I was writing a book on humor that would take 2 years. People told me it will be a very short book, and I am deep into it for the last 20 years, or almost forgot. I was on my way to a Spinoza book and just had this idea of the humor book, with this thesis I had since my early 20s. And I got engulfed there for 20 years because there was so much information that nobody knew of, because these topics are never in indices of books. And so I had really to read again everything with an eye for it in order to find it, and to put humor or laughter not as a stylistic device, but to look for arguments for its use. All right. So despite or based on this very, very strong historical basis, of which maybe we didn't have so much of an idea, we can try to develop a view of humor that would help us think better. For that, we need to follow another tradition. That tradition may be called Homo risibilis. This is how I call it. It's the ridiculous human being. And that tradition departed a little bit from the Homo ridens, for the laughing human being, in the Middle Ages through a monk called Niekerk, and then Montaigne formulated one sentence about it, and then it's very rare to find it in the history of philosophy. That idea that Niekerk, who was a commentator of Aristotle's logic, formulated was that the human being is not only the laughing animal, as they say, but also the laughable animal, the ridiculous human being. So this was in the Middle Ages, and Montaigne says in the essay that he dedicates to Democritus, the laughing philosopher, and Heraclitus, the weeping philosopher, he says that we are not so much the laughing animals as the laughable animal. The whole essays of Montaigne, if you ever read them, I think can be better understood if we see the effort of Montaigne of transmuting the very easy laughter at others into self-laughter, but that self-laughter that unites us with the others, looking for what is common inside us with the rest of the people we are laughing at. if we are laughing at something, that means that it caught our attentions, that we are somewhat critical of that. Sometimes there are different kinds of laughter. Now, what about the same thing or a variant of it inside us? What does this thing reveals about us? So looking inside, this is the gesture of Montaigne trying to understand what's going on inside him, to know how he can amend himself instead of trying to amend the rest of the world. And by finding within him correlation between what he was laughing outside, you know, consciousness is more easily looking outside than inside, and Montaigne's effort was to look inside. So he was using laughter to redirect the sense of humor towards himself, and then try to find a common ground, an egalitarian ground between himself and the rest of the people. This part of his thought, this philosophic use of humor, is missed by most commentators because only the style and the vivacity of the images and the anecdotes is being recorded, and not that movement from laughter to self-laughter to embracing ridicule. So Montaigne says that part of our reason is necessarily, of our mind, of consciousness, of wisdom, is necessarily folly. He says we cannot get rid of that. But he embraces that, not in so many words, but just in the fact that he says that we should not, as Pascal did, despise ourselves, our own self. Pascal, reading Montaigne, decided to despise himself on the basis of what Montaigne showed. But Montaigne said in advance, there is no more miserable creature than the one that despises herself on the basis of what she is. Now, all this is completely lost in the essays that nobody pays attention, and there is no thesis of what I said now. This is my own thesis, my own way of showing how humor helps Montaigne get to this equanimity that is the feeling that you have when you read the essays. But on this basis, I have developed my own view, which is called Homo visibilis, the ridiculous human being. And I offer a way of embracing one's ridicule, one's laughable aspects as something that unites deeply all human beings. It may be that when we laugh, we share this kind of ridiculousness, that we acknowledge in that laughter, although we never dare speak of it. Why? Because society pits us usually one against the other. And in this proposal that I'm making here, we will be deeply united by our frailty, vulnerability, finitude, mistakes, folly, vanity, and necessarily so. And by acknowledging that, we won't find ourselves to be necessarily at odds with each other. We will find in this a cheerful aspect of us as human beings that we can relate to. So this is the basis of my thesis book that I'm writing, What We Have in Common, a Philosophy for a Global World. But now, before reaching that absolutely fantastic state in which you can laugh at yourself with other human beings, at the human in you, before that, there is a movement of taking laughter that is usually towards the outside and using it in the inside. This is very difficult. Most people do not want to do it and cannot do it. They have a wonderful sense of humor, but they laugh at things that are exterior to them. So to look inside makes you lose your smile. You don't find the things so funny. That's all right. The tool I'm proposing is an internal use of humor that actually won't make us see things spontaneously funny. because when it's our things that happen, the car that it's not in the place that it chooses to be, and being late when it's very important, we don't tend to laugh about it in the moment. We do that in the future when we tell the story. But you know, as philosophers, we should not be impressed by this time difference. If we can do it in the future, that means maybe that, rationally speaking, we could do it now. Of course, we should then skip some psychological problematics that we may have with that. But we could see the discrepancy between what we want to happen and what actually happens. And maybe we could, if not laugh at this or smile at this, at least, as Kierkegaard says, note the discrepancy. That discrepancy, which actually tragedies are made of, I want something and I don't get it. That discrepancy, when translated into an incongruity, makes you see it as a comical thing. And we are the human beings, we are the self, we are the beings in general that do not get what they want on the intellectual, spiritual, emotional, instinctual levels. So we, by definition, are those that are defined best through that tension, because between what we would like to happen, all these needs and desires and wants on the one side, and the capacity of fulfilling them on the other, which actually reason brings about. So I think it's important not to solve this tension. Most traditions in religions, in philosophy, solve them, either by saying renounce the desires, the wants, etc., some form of asceticism. And others have said implement them, even if it's ruining the other's ambitions or wishes or at other cost. And some have said renounce the wishes and renounce rationality, for example, Taoist. And I say keep them alive, because both the wants and the incapacity maybe of fulfilling them, because this is what defines you as a human being. Now, we may use humor in order to ease the tension that this creates. Of course, it's not very funny, but if you notice this as an example of an incongruity, a discrepancy, you may see that this can be, in other circumstances, on a stage, if it happens to another human being, the cause of a comedy. But if you see it within yourself, you can ease the tension, which has very important consequences. That means that you can live with a complexity, with an ambivalence, with a richness of the human condition that no other tool can help you live well. So that internalized humor, which is actually, according to my definition, a form of compassionate aggression, if you want, also helps you have various points of view within you. The wants, the desires, they all speak. They all are present without needing to identify themselves. You get to know them better. You can get to implement the idea of self-knowledge that actually you cannot without maybe that tool, because we are opaque to ourselves. We can have maybe an alternative to approaching the unconscious that maybe philosophers do not have through the use of humor, because humor is by definition the tool of ambiguity and ambivalence. And basically, I think that ambiguity and ambivalence is with our relationship with the truth. We get it that maybe reality is nonsensical, tragical, with not much relation to us, but we cannot live there. We can glimpse it only in moments. So we need to have an ambivalent attitude toward the truth. We are holding to impossible things. We are continuing our lives and we are not very sure that it has any meaning, and still we have to do that. We need to be strong, but we know that we are walking on not on certain ground. This is that illusion, of our own importance, maybe of our own meaning of life, is the target of humor usually, So holding all these contradictions, ambivalence, and ambiguity without us help us get self-knowledge, deliberate better, live with conflict if necessary, and maybe resolve it on a higher level, as I explained in the book on the human condition. By embracing our ridicule, we get to a situation of stable joy and a kind of alternative to eternity by reaching happiness. But this is for another talk. Thank you so much.
Lydia, wonderful. Thank you. Jenna, are you back?
Yes, I'm back, Andrea.
Oh,
Thank
wonderful.
goodness.
All right. Okay, great. I mean, just thank you so much. It's so exciting. Jenna was saying her brain is exploding. But I'm going to hand over to Jenna to kind of just conduct the kind of question and answer session. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And thank you, Lydia. Your presentation was so insightful. It was informative. It was inspiring. It was thought-provoking. I felt like, you know, we had a historical, theoretical, and philosophical lecture on humor today. I found it just so fascinating that I feel I don't even have enough time to process all the information in order to ask you all the questions I have, because I have so many questions coming out of my head. So that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that, especially that you went through the historical side of it, because I find that fascinating. I love doing the research. I tried to do research on stand-up comedy in particular, and I really went the historical route with that. So I can just imagine how much work and effort and research went into what you just brought us today, let alone all the books and research and articles you've done. So thank you so much. I'm going to now hand over to other people. If you have any questions for Lydia, you can either drop a note in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and pose your questions. And if there's no one yet, I'm going to take advantage. Lydia, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that Americans don't really want to acknowledge or focus on the dark aspects of humor. Why is that?
Well, I think there is an ideology there, you know, or an ethos of cheerfulness and optimism, yes? So it was Europe generally that made, you know, a deep association between the tragic and the comic. And the Americans do not want that. You know, I teach there part of the year, and my students of 18, and not only mine, I was told by a professor in Chicago that he tried to teach a course on tragedy and they wouldn't come. The ethos is that if you work hard, you succeed. So the idea that life can be tragic, out of your control, and that bad things would happen to good people is not something they are willing to acknowledge. This weakens them. So if you don't have the tragic, then you don't have much access to a darker side of humor, yes? So it's a reluctance to acknowledge the tragic, you know, the grounds on which maybe America was created as a new, young, optimistic country, and this ethos continues to this day. So you need to go to Europe to find, you know, some ideas like tragic joy. It's very weird, or the association of the tragic and the comic.
Yes.
So humor for the most American, it's a white magic. Well, what is called white and black, maybe it's not politically correct, you know, but I lived in Africa many years, and I remember I went to see some a magician that made fantastic things. So this is my association with that. For benign, let's say, magic. So this is all they recognize. They do not recognize the darker sides. So they recently, there's been a book about satire, and we had a symposium in the association, and only someone from Europe said about the dark sides of satires. And the writers were seasoned professors, you know, and not necessarily disconnected philosophers. One of them is a professor of business. He couldn't see any dark side to satire. You see, he couldn't. So that's very interesting. So this is why we have to unite from all over the world, you know, to bring various facets from Africa, from China, from India, from Europe, and the continental and the analytic tradition. The analytic tradition is very thin in relationship to the tragic.
Lydia, that's a brilliant answer. As you're speaking, I'm busy taking down notes that I'm going to use for future. I find it fascinating that you say, like, Americans don't really want to acknowledge the negative aspects of satire, when we just have to think about Donald Trump. I see Andrea mentions Donald Trump in the questions, how he uses humor, and these days so many politicians use satire in particular, whether it's in their speech or when they go on a podcast or when they go on a late night show. And such satire is actually making them more likable and more laughable, and more people, which we know with Donald Trump, is not always a good thing. So I think there's definitely so many dark aspects to satire. And I love that you've outlined how different parts of the world focus on different parts of humor. I just found that fascinating. Lydia, really.
I want to say something about that. At the same time, the Americans were told, there is a book, Self and Something in America, how humor became part of the corporate self. They're supposed to have a sense of humor, and they are taught exactly how to have it. And the people who write as you said, the presidential addresses or whoever, they know how to put the joke at the beginning, and there's a certain timing. So this is interesting, but it's certain kinds of jokes that are supposed to work, yes, and not the rest. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much, Lydia. I'm going to hand over to Prof. Lawrence now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I actually enjoyed, especially the emphasis that probably to ourselves. Time philosophy has maybe played this role as love of wisdom, maybe in another way, that maybe philosophers have to rework it back. And what do I mean? Wisdom. And then you get out in this space and begin to speculate, and you get into the transcendental realm. And then from there, you begin to apply maybe power, maybe prejudice, and a whole lot of things. You start creating another world. And maybe in doing that, you end up maybe alienating humanity. You begin to alienate humanity. So that charge for me is very, very important. And what I think I've gained from this talk is that humor can be able to get us back to our common humanity.
Yeah. Well, yes, thank you so much. It's a very, very important comment. And for me, there is
everybody, we have to learn to laugh at himself. At our pride, assuming the nothingness of him, assuming the finitude, the overall nothingness that summarizes existence, begins to capture our attention each time we talk, each time we create this world of conquest and counter-conquest. I think humor would have begun to serve as a way to redefine human existence. And then we discovered that eventually, at the level of human psychology, at the level of human biology, we probably will achieve more basis, more groundings.
I agree with you. I think these are great thoughts. This is at least what I try to convey in what we have in common. You can see that there is humor in every society, maybe various forms, but it's always there. It's a way of handling conflict. The human being himself, herself, is a conflict inside. And there is a conflict between one human being and the other, and between the human being and the world. So, of course, I think that working with a common humanity, which is actually humor, it's formulated through humor. We don't know the exact content of it. I would like to work with you to formulate that. This is a great thing that we can connect that can connect us together and rebuild, as you say, philosophy on a sound foundation of cooperation and acknowledging the commonalities that we have. That for me is embracing our own ridicule as an open-ended philosophy or minimal criteria that enable to create interesting ties with different religions, different communities, different philosophies, but defining the human being as that incongruity that some philosophies, religions, and culture try to solve in that way, the others in another way. In my philosophy, I solve differently, but there is a common ground in a global world, which I think is very important. Otherwise, philosophy has no part in it. We have different philosophies, but no dialogue. So as you said, I'm really proposing humor as a way of redefining global community. Thank you so much for emphasizing that and understanding that. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Prof. Lawrence. I'm glad that Lydia heard that. I don't know if it was an internet connection on my side or Prof. Lawrence, but I like missed a whole gap there. So bravo, Lydia, on making sense of that. And thanks very much for your question, Prof. Lawrence. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Massey Sekavat now.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the presentation, which I enormously enjoyed. Before continuing, I should also check if you can hear me properly.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good, great. So quick question. You seem to be overtly emphasizing humanism as a philosophical framework and also as a way to frame humor. The question is, at the wake of the developments during the 20th century, both philosophical and sociopolitical, and given the current circumstances, again, sociopolitical circumstances of the world, how far do you think humanism can work as a framework for understanding anything social, including humor?
Well, as I said, if humor is still seen only in its light side, we cannot understand much. We have to be deeply interested in its darker sides, its connection with humiliation. You know, we may have an internal use of humor because we feel humiliated, and then we can, or frustrated, work with that. But we forget that there were uses external, yes, of humor in order to humiliate other people, and there still are. So there are deep connections between humor and humiliation, humor and shame, humor and guilt. So if humor were not this kind of double-edged tool, it's a tool, actually. It's very interesting. It can do one thing and its opposite. It brings us together, but it can alienate also. And I think it brings us together by alienating at the same time something else. So if we look at this complex tool that makes us maybe alleviate the anxiety that we have by pushing something out, it can be a human being, an idea, you know, something else, or maybe some kind of aggression between us momentarily. Looking at the darker side, we may find something that enables us to understand the human being better. Also, all these things, the capacity to humiliate, to the capacity to have shame, guilt, you know, there is almost not a harder situation that a person that is being ridiculed. People on the net, on Facebook, you know, young people commit suicide out of that. This was also the case in ancient Greece. They could make, especially in societies of shame rather than guilt, make people take their lives out of ridicule. It's very interesting from an evolutionary point of view to understand the power of ridicule. It means maybe an isolation of the human being. We do not understand fully or accept fully how much we are social and depend on society to survive, because we think we can go to the supermarket and buy food and cook for ourselves. But it's one step out before that, you know, that being alienated and ridiculed. It's something, it's very interesting in psychological terms now. I think that the psychologists of the movement of philosophy of humor are trying to study those who are terrified of being laughed at. So we need to look at that, you know, the known, you know, how humor was used to laugh at people, to humiliate, to marginalize, and then use those tools inwardly in order to accept those parts of us that we do not want to accept, because acceptance is the first step toward changing them. If we don't recognize them, that doesn't mean that they are not alive in us. So first accepting them and bringing them to the inward discussion, and then beginning that work of compassionate aggression. That means that self-education that is actually philosophy itself, you know. And that works because we say with humor, you exist and you don't exist. You are part of me and you are not part of me. I accept you and I don't accept you. That ambivalence is much more effective in a therapeutic point of view and educational point of view inside that any clear-cut approach, you know. So it's first of all a self-education in a way. And, you know, I may be a little bit, I don't know if you consider me an optimist or a pessimist in that, but finally, what the human being can do in terms of control is change a little bit his own or her consciousness in order to cope better. Then this, of course, irradiates to other people and to society. It gives strength, power, inward power, you know, to advance those changes also in society. So I don't know if I actually answered exactly your question. I used it to develop other things, but I hope somewhat relevant.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I can do a quick follow-up, Jenna?
Yes, go ahead, Mercy.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah, I totally understand where you come from, but the point is that humor basically functions on sensus communius. So the point of departure for humor, for both the creation and reception of humor, is usually something that me and you, self and other, agree on. This self is a split in itself. As Simon Critchley says, you have a body and you have a soul, and this tension never is resolved. But because humor functions as a common ground of understanding, how far can it be used to change the society? Because if you start from something which everybody accepts, there's always the danger, quote unquote, that you might be reinforcing the things that exist rather than trying to change them or improve them.
So I was not talking about humor as a tool for the change of society, but as a tool for changing oneself. But I can talk about that. That is what Socrates did. Socrates was making himself ridiculous and was attracting the laughter of others, and was using this opening in the other psyche through laughter to reorient the laughter, I think, towards other targets. So he was taking the regular values of the citizens of Athens that would then laugh at him and philosophy that he represented, and was taking it and redirecting it toward the real target that would be, you know, things in society that needs to be changed. So this is what Plato formulates when he said in his definition of the laughable that we need to make sure that people laugh at what is rightly laughable. So this is the tool of philosophy. So we, as philosophers, we are ridiculous in the eyes of society, but taking this ridicule, and this laughter, we can show how the real target should be some of society's assumptions, views, and goals. And this is what Socrates did. He called this his death. This is what Plato formulated, and he saw the importance of laughter. This is the breach in the soul that laughter creates. This is how Socrates creates a common ground with the audience first, but then try to use that in order to implement some philosophic thinking, some rational thinking. It doesn't always work, but this is the tool that we have. It's never about laughing at others, it's showing ourselves, and he tried to show himself as a regular human being, a common human being, yes, even having the lower hand in order to bring about these changes. So it's not the irony that has been associated with him by Plato. It's more the joking and the humorous one that you find in Xenophon. All right.
Thanks, Massey, very much for your questions. Thanks, Lydia, for your answers. I see Jason, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Prof. Amir. I was just thinking, something that interests me. I've gotten a little caught up in Lisa Feldman Barrett's sort of account of cognitive construction of emotions, and a lot of it seems to lend itself to this. And what I'm thinking is this, that she talks quite a lot in her work, which is neurobiology, about the value of emotional granularity. That the more granular a description or a conception of something we have, the more able to encounter and deal with the world we are. And I just noticed that there's a thread of that, or what interests me reading that against what you were saying, is this idea of part of humor is obviously essentially that kind of dealing with the contingent, the sudden shock that things are other than we initially thought they would be, and that's present across all of it. But what you've been saying, which is quite interesting, about the importance of these different cultural styles or emphases, is quite interesting to me, because it suggests that there's a way to describe one way to describe the value for our own personal development in exposing ourselves to these different, why should Americans be interested in darker kinds of humor? Why should people care about what a kind of, a few weeks ago, we talked about an Igbo sense of humor from Nigeria as a kind of character building. And why are these things interesting? Well, because they give us, and to go back to Massey's question, what interested me about that is this idea that it might be that when sort of conventions of humor are fixed in sort of genre expectations, they can become fixed. But this idea you've been talking about cultivating an appreciation for different sorts of humor, suddenly reads to me very much as important to our ability to read the world in more granular and detailed ways.
Yes. Yeah, humor, thank you so much for your remark. I know about this Nigerian character. You know, I want to say it now, so maybe because some of you are not philosophers, I also edit the Israeli Journal of Humor Research, an international journal. It's in English, and we publish articles of all aspects of humor. This is how I had quite an acquaintance with Nigerian scholars. So not necessarily humor, but also in the Philosophy of Humor Yearbook, we have a part of that rekindles satire or humorous writing for those who are interested, and a part that also publishes articles about the pedagogy of humor and philosophy of humor in teaching. And we also invite people to create dialogues there in another section between comedians and philosophy, thinking that we may learn much about humor by interrogating comedians. But for example, if you look into other cultures, I recently published something about China in that matter. That's very interesting. In the West, you have this ideal of the laughing philosopher, Democritus. And you can see that this myth continues throughout the history of philosophy, to Western philosophy, 2,500 years, it returns in various forms. But in China, you have this ideal of the Taoist sage. He was laughing, a laughing sage. And this influenced Buddhism as it came to China and was created there, Chan Buddhism. So you have these laughing Buddhas that did not exist in India and other parts of Buddhism later. So this immigrated to Japan and created the Zen Buddhism, in which laughter would be the moment in one of the two traditions there of illumination, and also of the koans that would be some kind of paradoxical questions that would elicit laughter to get you out of rationality. So you can see how an ideal of Taoism, the laughing sage, finds its way to the laughing Buddhas, you know, with the bellies and all that, and then to Zen Buddhism. And we can certainly, as you say, analyze better either the conflicts in society and the values in society and the things that you appreciate and you put down, you know, through the uses of humor. This is a great tool. And then maybe we can have some kind of map, of blueprint of what is important, not necessarily the details, but what's going on. Is it the structure? Is it putting down? Is it, as I suggest, being together at the expense of the third one, to unite against one? And the one, is it an idea? Is it we and the others? Is it what? You know, the French philosophers said that it's Bataille who said this is actually anxiety. So for a moment, we lift that anxiety through humor, you know, in being together. It's almost a religious congregation in the comedian nightclub. You know, we are all together, but someone or something is put to death. What? Okay, this is one way of seeing that. So you see, this is dark, but this is also profound, and this is interesting. So we may want to use that.
Thank you. I'm going to use that. Humor and anxiety is actually something that I was going to be thinking about. So thank you very much for hitting that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jason. Yes, I also very much like that about anxiety and humor. Thank you so much, Lydia, once again. I'm going to hand over to Andrea to end things off for us today. But just from our side, thank you very much. That was fascinating. And thank you, everyone, for your fantastic questions.
So let me just maybe write my email in the chat, if it's possible. Then you can all, if you want to join, you know, either the Philosophic Association or to have some interest in the journal I'm editing. I forgot my own name. Just a moment. This is good talking when you forget yourself. So here it is. So write to me and we see what we can do. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thanks, Lydia. I mean, yeah, we could. I keep on saying this about these seminars, is that we could be chatting to you for the rest of the day. It would be wonderful. But it is an absolutely wonderful way for us to end our week. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I have shared that feeling of kind of your mind going, wow, there's so much to talk about, so many things to still think about. So I'm hoping that our seminar will keep on generating these ideas, and that we will you know, come to something in the end. So thank you very, very much. I should just quickly apologize if anyone had sound issues. My sound was a little bit shaky, and I'm hoping that that's not going to affect our recording too much. But I will put the recording on YouTube for those of you who want to go back and listen again and again. Yes, but other than that, thank you so much. It was lovely. It was lovely to see you in person and in face, and it was a very enjoyable presentation and very exciting. And thanks everyone for joining, and we will hopefully see you all next week. Next week we will be chatting to Dr. Villani on humor. I'm trying to kind of think back to what it was, but it's the question of the togetherness actually that is supposed in the humor audience. So that'll be an interesting, I think he's going to actually critique that. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with there. But yes, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure, and I'm very glad that it was enjoyable. You know, talk about humor needs to be at least that.
At least that, absolutely. Yes. Thanks so much. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lydia. Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Andrea. Bye-bye.